All right, we're going to barrel along into part two. We're going to go a little out of order as it reads today. We're actually going to only be talking about sections 73 and 75. Section 74 is way out of chronological context here, so I'm going to give it its own space. So a paper's introduction into section 73. Again, this is the same copy that we get with section 72 and the section 71. All this handwriting of Sidney Rigdon, the Newell K. Whitney papers, these loose stack of papers that we get. It's part of that little stack there. On the back of this page, it shows, in very nice handwriting, I might add, Newell K. Whitney, N.K. Whitney, is written there. And also, it is written, command to elders what to do till conference. There you go. And that looks like in graphite or pencil, as we would say. We also get a copy found in Revelation Book 1. Very little correction on this text. What we do get on the title here, which is interesting, is you get read or read on the left side, and then on the right side it says read and compared. So what I believe this means is, yeah, we've gone through this, and it's been verified, and we're ready to produce it or publish it, I guess, is what I'm assuming it means by that. It is section 29 in the original Doctrine and Covenants. There is a manuscript history copy, and there are no changes in the modern section heading. So pretty clean here for us, for our purposes here today. So circumstantially to this, the original copy, very brief, it just says Hiram, Portage County, Ohio, January 10th, 1832. So hallelujah, we have made it beyond 1831, and we're in a whole new year. That was a huge year, like really, really big. So glad that's behind us, but that was quite a lot of what we have here. Okay. So I would argue, in the way that they've done this in the original copy, that when it says, quote, a revelation to Joseph and Sidney Rigdon, the word of the Lord unto them concerning the elders of the church of the living God, established in the last days, making known the will of the Lord unto the elders, what they shall do until conference, I think, is also an introduction to the text, and some others agree with me. So we don't get a revelation number, actually, in Revelation Book 1. We just get that read, if you will, word over there. But we do get a revelation given Hiram, Portage County, Ohio, January 10th, 1832. Now, the original Doctrine and Covenants actually agrees with me. Thank you very much. And it says, quote, a revelation to Joseph Smith Jr. and Sidney Rigdon, January 1832. The word of the Lord unto them concerning the elders of the church of the living God, established in the last days, making known the will of the Lord unto the elders, what they shall do until conference. So, thank you, Doctrine and Covenants. Not only did you finally give me something to talk about, but yeah, we're on the same page there. So, manuscript history for this gives a little more. It says, from this time until the 8th or 10th of January, 1832, myself and Elder Sidney Rigdon continued to preach in Shalersville, Ravenna, and other places, setting forth the truth, vindicating the cause of our Redeemer, shewing that the days of vengeance was coming upon this generation like a thief in the night, that prejudice, blindness, and darkness filled the minds of many, and caused them to persecute the true church and reject the true light, by which means we did much towards allaying the excited feelings which were growing out of the scandalous letters then being published in the Ohio Star at Ravenna by the before-mentioned apostate Ezra Booth. On the 10th of January, 1832, I received the following. And so this is a little after the challenge was thrown down, the gauntlet was thrown down, perhaps. And again, Ezra Booth, Sidney's writer, didn't show up. So they preached anyway. They did the best they could, and apparently they made some progress. So there you go. So Documents Volume 2, the historical introduction to this, gives us Joseph Smith and Sidney Rigdon's preaching, as well as that of other elders sent from Kirtland, was intended in part to combat misinformation and criticism published by former church member Ezra Booth in the Ohio Star, following instructions in the December Revelations to call upon church critics to meet you both in public and in private. Rigdon challenged Booth and Sidney's writer, a former member in Hiram, to defend their claims against the church in public, but neither man accepted. According to a later Joseph Smith history, these efforts did much towards allaying the excited feelings that stemmed from Booth's influence. Joseph Smith and Rigdon returned to Hiram, Ohio around 8th of January, 1832, and on 10th of January, Joseph Smith dictated this revelation, quote, making known the will of the Lord, regarding what they and the elders should do until the next conference, which was held 2 weeks later. In addition to instructing Joseph Smith, Rigdon, and other elders to continue preaching, the revelation directed Joseph Smith and Rigdon to renew their work on the Bible revision after the conclusion of the upcoming conference. So once again, a pause. Please stop revising, go preach, and then come back. But what's interesting about this is, as much as I've read it up to this point, it's always like, you can keep doing this or keep doing that, but you got to keep preaching. You got to keep preaching along the way. You got to keep going. You got to keep going. That never ends. That never stops. And finally, from the historical introduction we get, Joseph Smith probably dictated this revelation to Rigdon in an upstairs bedroom of the John and Alice Johnson home, where they worked on the Bible revision. A copy of the revelation inscribed by Rigdon was provided to Newell K. Whitney and the newly appointed bishop in Kirtland, perhaps shortly thereafter. The revelation's instructions to the elders preaching in the area were probably spread through other copies or by word of mouth, which is kind of the best you could do. They would write maybe out a few copies here and there, or they would just read it out loud to people. That's how they did it. And so this stack of papers that we're getting all these sections from is an example of that. Footnote 7 to this introduction, actually, says Rigdon wrote N.K. Whitney, Kirtland, Ohio, on the back of this revelation. That this document was marked as being intended for Whitney suggests that it was a copy, not the original. The replacement in the body of the initial inscription of "it is expedient," a later phrase in the Revelation, with "it is practicable," is apparently the correction of a copying error, which also suggests that this document is a copy. Just a little bit of the forensics about why do we think this is original or a copy or the first version of it. There's a lot of those little details that the editors of the Joseph Smith papers used to determine this stuff, so it's kind of fun. All right, so not a whole lot of footnotes and context to this, but we do get one, which is interesting. So from the revelation we get, now verily I say unto you, unto my servants, Joseph and Sidney, saith the Lord, it is expedient to translate again. And inasmuch as it is expedient, practicable to preach in the regions round about until conference. So do your revision, but keep preaching. Footnote 4, by 20 November, when John Whitmer left Ohio for Missouri, Joseph Smith's revision of the Bible was completed at least through Mark 9:1, Mark chapter 9, verse 1, at which point the handwriting changes from Whitmer's to Rigdon's. By 16 February 1832, Joseph Smith was reviewing John chapter 5. And all the other references we have are just spiritual citations. But I just thought that was interesting. Like, they really went right away. Oh, there's a revelation. Okay, John, stand aside. Rigdon's going to keep going at it. And you can see that in the revisions of the Bible, which is kind of fun. So there you go. That is section 73. We're going to skip section 74 just for a moment in this part, and we're going to talk about section 75. So again, the most original is from the same stack of papers from the Newell K. Whitney papers, handwriting of Sidney Rigdon. So again, the fold marks are all the same. Everything's the same. 2 sections are on 2 separate pages, actually. But all of it come from the same collection belonging to Whitney. So once again, section 75, 2 different revelations that were given at the same time and were merged together. And we'll see that in a moment. It's very prominent in the later copies that we get. So we do get a copy in the Smith and Hyde notebook, handwriting of Orson Hyde the whole way this time. And the rest of it, or what we call part 2 now, is actually not even here, right? So the first portion of this revelation, all the way up to the first amen, if you will, is in Revelation, or is in the Hyde and Smith notebook. And it looks like they kind of wrote that down and then ran off with it, and they didn't get the second part. So the copy that we get out of Revelation book 1 is actually underneath a crossed out section, which we now call section 82. So you'll notice there's a little X through there. That was originally section 82, which apparently was not intended to be originally printed, but we do have it today. So that's what that cross out is. It is in the handwriting of John Whitmer. What we get is a lot of last name additions. So these are a lot of people being called on missions. There's verse numbering by W.W. Phelps, but he also adds in these last names. Now, in the past, what you may have noticed is that Joseph Smith is usually the one doing this. So For some reason, William W. Phelps took that over. What we do get is another revelation received at the same time and place, which is the rest of section 75. Connected, you see here, is written on the side by W. W. Phelps. And and then it keeps the last names going in the verse numbering. So it's kind of fun how they say, like, yeah, these are two separate revelations, but I love how he kind of spans connected across the two, and very, very illustrative and helpful, I'm sure, to publishers. It is section 87 in the Doctrine and Covenants, the original version, and it is in the manuscript history. And we do get section heading changes today. So 1981 says, the occasion was that of a conference previously appointed. At this conference, Joseph Smith was sustained and ordained president of the high priesthood. We finally get to that. Certain elders who had encountered difficulty in bringing men to an understanding of their message desired to learn more in detail as to their immediate duties. This revelation followed. And the 2013 edition of this, again, a little different because of the Joseph Smith papers and other things, says, this section comprises two separate revelations. The first in verses 1 through 22, the second in verses 23 through 36, given on the same day. The occasion was a conference at which Joseph Smith was sustained and ordained president of the high priesthood. Certain elders desired to learn more about their immediate duties. These revelations followed. So this is a pretty big day. We finally get a first president. So if you're curious about when did we start getting first presidents, this is it. And this is the 25th of January, 1832. That's the first time you have something called a first presidents officially. So no counselors, no so forth and so on. That sort of evolved later, but we finally fulfilled that little portion of the Articles and Covenants and the law and all that, where you have to have a president of the high priesthood. So it's interesting to me that it took this long to get there, because we're in 1832 now. But anyway, no criticism. I'm just the amateur historian. So circumstantial introductions to section 75, we actually get nothing whatsoever in the Newell K. Whitney papers. So that stack, we get nothing in it. Smith and Hyde's notebook just gives us a commandment given to 10 elders. That's it. So at least we know how many people were there, or at least we think. Revelation Book 1 notes this as 79. Says, a revelation given at Amherst in a conference held there to 10 elders, January 25th, 1832. And there's not much in the Doctrine and Covenants. The manuscript history does give, a few days before the conference was to commence in Amherst, Lorain County, I started in company with the elders that lived in my own vicinity and arrived in due time. At this conference, much harmony prevailed, and considerable business was done to advance the kingdom and promulgate the gospel to the inhabitants of the surrounding country. The elders seemed anxious for me to inquire of the Lord, that they might know his will, or learn what would be most pleasing to him for them to do, in order to bring men to a sense of their condition. For as it was written, all men had gone out of the way, so that none doeth good, no, not one. As it was written, all men have gone out of the way. I inquired and received the following. And so that's what we get from the manuscript history, again, kind of written in the first person of Joseph Smith, but he didn't actually write those words down himself. Those were sort of dictations as he gave this history later on in life. So Documents Volume 2 gives us a lot more in the historical introduction. It says, Joseph Smith dictated this revelation and the one that follows at a general conference in Amherst, Ohio, 50 miles west of Kirtland, Ohio, on the 25th of January, 1832. On 10th of January, 1832, a revelation stated that the next conference, the several missions the elders were to fulfill would be made known unto them. William E. McClellan later wrote that the 25th of January conference was attended by between 70 and 80 official characters, apparently men who held church offices, from various locations. Minutes of the conference, if kept, are not extant, but a later Joseph Smith history recounts that a considerable business was done to advance the kingdom. This included the licensing of one or more elders, the appointment of Orson Pratt as the president of the elders, and ordaining of Joseph Smith as the president of the high priesthood. Following instruction in the November 1831 revelation that one be appointed to that office. So I guess you get the first elders quorum president, if we want to call it that today, plus the first president of the church, the president of the high priesthood. There you go. We get a couple of missionary calls out of this. So the historical introduction continues. The 25th January revelations indicate that the men appointed to missions were ones who volunteered to preach, but earlier instructions suggested that proselyting was a duty rather than a choice for faithful elders. The minutes of an October 1831 conference noted that the Spirit declared that proclaiming the gospel and warning the inhabitants of the earth of the things known in the Church of Christ in these last days was one of the elders' duties. That, my friends, is very much a thing today. If you are an ordained elder in the Melchizedek priesthood, it is, and the church preaches this to the young men, like it is a duty for you to go on your missions. So that's a thing to this day. Missionary preparations happened here, which I thought was really interesting. So, historical introduction again says most of the individuals mentioned in this 25th January revelation attended an October 1831 conference. At that conference, several brethren were called by the clerk who were desirous to preach the gospel, and Joseph Smith examined them for fitness to be ordained. These men were likely the ones assigned in this revelation to preach. Is that your missionary interview process? Like, what does that mean, fitness? Like, can you walk? Can you preach? Are you in good standing? I don't know what that means. I think it's really interesting that even back then, it wasn't like, oh, you're going to go and you just go. They would actually, like, Joseph Smith apparently would examine them somehow for fitness to be ordained. So maybe that's interviews, maybe it's something else, but I thought that was interesting. Anyway. So when was this all given? Well, historical introduction. A reminiscence written by Pratt, for example, states that a revelation was written in the presence of the whole assembly on the 25th of January. Edison Barney, who was also present, recalled that Sidney Rigdon inscribed the revelation text as Joseph Smith pronounced it on that day. In both of these accounts, it is unclear whether the author is referring to just one or to both of the 25th January revelations. Further to this, when John Whitmer copied both revelations into Revelation Book 1, he introduced the second as another revelation received at the same time and place. Upon their publication in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants, however, the revelations were combined into a single text, a pattern followed in subsequent publications. So it's never not been published together. But we're not exactly sure kind of what the circumstances were. We're taking these from reminiscence from other people. So some content and footnotes from the revelation itself we get. Therefore, verily I say unto my servant William E. McClellan, I revoke the commission which I gave unto him to go unto the eastern countries. And I give unto him for a new commission and a new commandment, in the which I the Lord chasteneth him for the murmurings of his heart, and he sinned. Nevertheless, I forgive him, and say unto him again, go ye into the south countries. So what's this all about? A little bit of a rebuke here. Footnote 8 shares that Samuel Smith was called on a mission, quote, about a month later. However, they had to discontinue their work. As Samuel Smith wrote, quote, because of disobedience, our way was hedged up before us. Brother William was taken sick, and I returned about the 25th of December, 1831. Smith's meaning is not entirely clear. He may have meant that some kind of disobedience, perhaps mere reluctance to preach, led to the failure of the mission, which was followed by McClellan's illness. Or he may have been implying that some kind of disobedience led to McClellan's illness, which in itself then halted the work. Joseph Smith visited the bedridden McClellan on the 28th of December. McClellan wrote that he was healed by Joseph Smith and returned with him to Hiram the next day. So it's not all chastening and nasty stuff. Apparently, Joseph actually came to him, gave him a blessing. He was healed, and apparently then got himself chewed out in a revelation. So standing chastened. Although I kind of wonder if that language would have been harsh back then. It might have just been like, hey, man, like, you messed up. Let's move on, like really gentle. Who knows? Anyway, further into the text we get, in whatsoever house ye enter, and they receive you, leave your blessings upon that house. And in whatsoever house ye enter, and they receive you not, you shall depart speedily from that house and shake off the dust of your feet as a testimony against them. And you shall be filled with joy and gladness, and know this, that in the day of judgment you shall be judges of that house and condemn them, and it shall be more tolerable for the heathen in the day of judgment than for that house. Yeesh. Footnote 14 to this says, a revelation dated July 1830 gave this same admonition, telling Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery that when their testimony was rejected, they were to leave a cursing instead of a blessing by casting off the dust of your feet against them as a testimony. And this is a kind of harsh language, but it's this idea of like, hey, we did all that we could. You know, people do this all the time, this motion that I'm doing here. My hands are clean. I'm done, you know. Again, there was an episode with the Campbellites, and I think it was Orson Pratt did this and took it a little too far and caused a bit of a problem. Anyway, careful when you dust, maybe, is the theme here. So the content also states to us, and again, verily I say unto you, that every man who is obliged to provide for his own family, let him provide, and he shall in no wise lose his crown, and let him labor in the church. Some of these missionaries actually kept close to home so that they could continue to care for their families. I found this very interesting. It wasn't just, they weren't just cast off to the farthest reaches. Some of them would come back. So footnote 3 from part 2 of this revelation says this. This apparently meant that those whose families might suffer in their absence would be allowed to preach in the vicinity of their own homes. Eden Smith, for example, continued to preach in the vicinity of Northampton, Ohio, returning after week-long trips to labor at home, as he wrote, quote, for the support of my family. This may also explain why these men, in contrast to those called in the earlier 25th of January 1832 revelation, were not assigned to travel in any specific direction. So I find this interesting that one way to interpret it mattereth not where you go, and go where you got to go. Might have just been like, hey, if you just need to stay close to home, why don't you leave for a few days? You can come back. You can continue taking care of your family. We're good. Okay, I'm going to leave again for a few days and do my mission. Very interesting. We definitely don't do that today. But I just find it interesting that they would make that sort of a concession, because back then it's like if you weren't laboring all the time, you didn't eat. I mean, that was just the nature of it. So there's part 2 for you, sections 73 and 75. We're going to get into section 74, which is actually an explanation, not necessarily termed a revelation or a commandment like the others. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, we'll get you on your way. This is actually from a very much earlier text that we're going to go from. So we're going to give it its own part. Stick around.